Thank you, Nicole. And I also want to take a moment just to thank Dr. Alshan for our keynote address and for anchoring us again in the really important intersections between our programs, our data, representation, and equity. This is clearly one of our acting commissioner's top priorities, right? Ensuring that our programs are fair and equitable and that we are removing barriers and doing our part to ensure equitable access to our programs and services. So I also want to thank you and thank the RDRC program for the opportunity to facilitate this panel. The size of the SSA disability programs is often described by the total number of people enrolled, and the total enrollment depends in part on the number of people who are newly awarded disability benefits every year, and the number of new awards depends in part on the number of new applications. And so we are really interested in the trends in applications and in better understanding what drives those. So in our next panel, the factors affecting disability and disability benefit receipt, we'll be taking a deeper look at some of these things. So first, we will have Italo Lopez-Garcia from the University of Southern California, and he'll present his paper on the role of physical, cognitive, and interpersonal occupational requirements and working conditions on disability and retirement. This is one of the first papers to use the second wave of the Occupational Requirements Survey, the ORS, and it matches ORS data to the National Health and Retirement Survey data to consider the relationship between mental and physical job requirements and retirement and eventually disability outcomes. This will be followed by Nicole Maestas. Thank you, Nicole, from Harvard and NBER, presenting legal representation in disability claims. Representation plays a large and growing role in disability adjudication. This paper investigates the impact on SSDI case outcomes when a claimant representative is engaged from the get-go. A little over a month ago, SSA announced an increase in the maximum fee that lawyers representing disability claimants can charge and collect, going from $6,000 to $7,200. So legal representation has been at top of mind for many people of late. The last time we increased the fee cap was in 2009, and we hope this change will increase representation. So we'll be interested in this. And our panel will conclude with a paper exploring worker and firm characteristics that drive the use of accommodation for workers with disabilities, presented by Stephanie Renan from RAND. One interesting aspect of this study is its use of administrative data from the state of Oregon on workplace accommodations, which provides a uniquely large sample size to explore variations in accommodation and across a large number of worker and employer characteristics, and may expand our understanding of demographic variation in the availability and use of workplace accommodations in a way that is really relevant also to our equity goals. So without further ado, I will turn it to Italo. Thank you so much for our first paper.
Italo, you're muted.
Okay, can you see my slides? Sorry. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I am Italo Lopez-Garcia. I'm a senior economist at the Center of Economic and Social Research in University of Southern California. I was about to say RAND. That's my former employer, and I love RAND. I used to be there, and my co-authors are from some of my co-authors are from RAND too. And this is joint work with Kathleen Mullen from USC and Jeffrey Wenger from RAND. The role of physical and mental requirements on retirement. For today I'm going to focus only on retirement. With the part on disability is work in progress. So I will be talking about that possibly in future talks. So I guess the overall question we have is, can we encourage individuals to delay retirement, and what is the role of occupational requirements in retirement and retirement transition? So a little bit of background. This is familiar to this audience. Increased life expectancy have increased the time spent in retirement, which people have shown to slow the labor force growth and also challenge the sustainability of the Social Security and Social Disability insurance programs. So job demands likely matter for retirement. So there's suggestive evidence showing that delays in retirement could encourage by improving working conditions. And also we know that this is a really important problem because more than half of American workers are exposed to hazardous working conditions, and it's likely to affect the retirement labor supply decisions later in life. However, the current evidence is rather conflicting. So there are similar results regarding the role of self-reported physical strain on retirement. And also there's some mixed evidence or conflicting evidence of the role of job demands on retirement when you compare self-reported measures from the HRS with the objective measures typically from ONIT. So this paper, what we're going to do, as Kate said, we're going to exploit new data from the Occupational Requirements Survey, which so far hasn't been used to address this question. And we're going to be using data from the Wave 2, which is just really fresh, and we're excited to talk about that. So the ORS, it's a very interesting survey conducted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in agreement with SSA. One of the advantages of the ORS, for example, compared with ONIT, is that this is basically conducted by field economists, not by job incumbents, who interview human resource specialists and occupational managers from the selected companies. We're going to be using the public version of the ORS from Wave 2. So Wave 2 was collected in 3 different years: sample 1, 2018 to 19, sample 2, 2018 to 20, sample 3 is undergoing. We're going to be using data from sample 1 and sample 2, and we're excited to looking forward when the sample 3 is released to incorporate it to our analysis. So there are 3 types of job requirements in the ORS: physical activity or physical job demands. There are 32 job traits. Environmental conditions, there are 10, and 11 cognitive and mental requirements. And all this data is covering more than 50,000 of observations and 390 occupations at the 6-digit level SOC code. So this ORS is amazing, has a lot of information, but also there are some problems and challenges using this data. There are some variables that are available and some variables that are really missing. For example, there are 3 types of variables in the ORS. The means and percentile, these are continuous variables, but for example, the hours standing or the means hours standing for a particular job, and also percentiles of hours standing for a particular job, but the percentiles are missing, whereas the means can be used. Also, binary variables for representing, for example, the percent of workers for which a particular job trait, such as reaching overhead, is required or is not required. And that is available for most occupations. And also frequency and duration variables, for example, the percent of workers that are exposed or not exposed to wetness or cold or heat. And also additive variables in the sense that not exposed to wetness or constantly or seldom or occasionally. However, these additive frequencies are not really available for most occupations. So we will be restricting our analysis to the variables that are highlighted in red. There are also some issues with missing job traits for some occupations. This is a big problem for a couple of physical job requirements and for some cognitive job requirements. So overall, our strategy to deal with missing data from the ORS is that we're going to use the mean standardized variables, mean standardized hours spent in one particular job trait when available, and we're going to be using the continuous variable, the percentage of workers that a particular trait X is required or exposed to a particular X working conditions. We'll also select traits that are reported for at least 70% of the occupations, which lead us to drop some requirements, such as cognitive job requirements, and we will impute the remaining traits for 6-digit level occupations using average job traits at the 2-digit level, 2-digit occupational level. So this is a little bit of a map of how it looks like. This is just to show you that basically we have a large, so we have a physical job demand, the physical job environment, and some of the mental requirements are available for a large number of occupations, but some of them, such as communicating verbally or problem solving, which are related to cognitive job requirements, will have to drop because they're available for less than 50% of the occupations in the data. Okay, this is some exercise we did, and this is just really like, I love these graphs because we wanted to see how the ORS compares to the ONET and what we can learn from this comparison. So every time we could, actually the ORS and the ONET collect data for very similar job traits. Although the scale is different, for example, in the ORS, it's going to be the percentage of workers for which a particular job trait is required. And in the ONET, it was the importance of that requirement for a particular job. So it's a different scale. So we showed like, what if we compare them graphically? And what we find, as you can see in these 2 examples in the right, is that there's a large degree of consistency across the two databases for the vast majority of the job trades, which is encouraging. There are some few exceptions, and we're not in them here before, but and those exceptions are typically because some of the ORS physical requirements have very little variation, so we drop those, as for example near vision or hearing, and some of them just the match is not really great, but there are very small cases that happens. Okay, so basically using this data and just using this analyzing statistical properties of the ORS job requirements, we drop some items which are here. Just want to emphasize for example, the four cognitive job requirements. There's a high level of missingness, but we drop them. We also drop some of them that had little variation or they are perfectly collinear, which leaves us with 4 indices. So one is the physical activity index, in which we will have 11 requirements, physical requirements, the physical work environment, in which we keep all 10 hazardous conditions, and two mental indices, one that reflects job autonomy and flexibility, which are 4 requirements, and one that the second mental index is related to people that are supervised in their work, or that implies working with public, which in a way is kind of the opposite to the first index. It just reflects like the opposite things, like jobs that they have offer little autonomy or little flexibility. So this is our final list of job traits. I'm not going to discuss each of them in the interest of time, but just to show you that basically the supervised and work in public mental requirement index is mostly related to jobs that offer little autonomy in opposition to the job autonomy and flexibility index. So now, next, we want to merge this ORH data to HRS. And the question here is, what is the right occupation we should use to merge these indices? So in year 1 project, what we did is that we used occupation individual health in wave 7, because we're following in our HRS panel, we're following everybody from wave 7 to wave 12. And we were merging indices to the occupation and individual health in the first wave that we observed this person. However, a better strategy might be to use the job demands from the most important job held during prime years. So in order to recover that job, we use data from the life history mill survey that includes rich occupational history. However, the problem, I mean, this is great news, but it's also challenging, because we also found that, for example, the self-reported most important occupation during prime years between age and 30 is only available for about 51% of HRS respondents. There's a little bit more information from the list of the 10 most important jobs in people's history. So we can actually supplement this information with the longest tenured occupation between the age 25 and 50 from the LHMS, and then we recover a few more cases. But the rest of the sample of HRS respondents, what we do is that we don't have more information occupational history, so we supplement with the first occupation observed in the panel at the entering wave. So that's going to be our strategy to merge data sets by occupation. And this is our estimation strategy. Basically, what we're going to do is that we're going to relate our indexes of job demands to 2 different retirement outcomes. One is going to be the retirement status, basically if the individual is fully retired or not at one particular wave, and also transitions from working in period T to fully retired in T+1. Where, for example, part-time and unemployed always going to be considered as individual is working, and we allow multiple transitions. So this is a very simple linear regression. Here, our interest is this coefficient alpha 1, which basically, since our job demand index is standardized, the interpretation of this coefficient is by how much a 1 standard deviation increase in a particular job demand index change the probability to be retired or the probability of transitioning into retirement. So these are our results. So this is our main result. So basically what we find is that physical and mental job requirements in the physical work environment is highly predictive of retirement and retirement transitions. Just to give you an example, for example, in the physical activity index, a 1 standard deviation increase in the physical activity index is associated with a 10% increase in the probability of being retired and a 5% increase in the probability of transitioning into retirement. On the other hand, a 1 standard deviation increase in the job autonomy and flexibility index associated with a 22% decrease in the probability of being in retirement and a 12% decrease in the probability of transitioning to retirement. And the index supervised work with public index, which we interpret as low autonomy, is actually where we're right. It behaves exactly opposite in the exactly opposite way as the job autonomy flexibility index. So it's a measure of just little autonomy. So we also find there is a large degree of heterogeneity in our results. For example, this is our heterogeneous results by gender. We find that physical job demands induce all workers to retire earlier, but this is much more pronounced among men. So as you can see here, in the physical activity index, an increase in the physical activity index associated with a 10% increase in the retirement transition among men and only a 1.7% among females. So this is true for the physical job demands and the physical work environment. There are no significant differences for the other two. And finally, we also find important heterogeneous difference by education. For example, we see that people without a college degree are much more affected by the physical job demands and the physical work environment than people that has a college education. And also we see that job autonomy and flexibility delays retirement much more for people that that are more educated with a college degree than people that don't have a college degree. So conclusions, I'm running out of time. So we find that physical demanding and hazardous jobs are likely to retire significantly earlier, and that more autonomous and flexible occupations significantly delay retirement. Males, low educated, and workers with poor health in physically demanding and hazardous jobs retire much earlier than the counterparts, and higher autonomy and flexibility helps delay retirement for all groups, but they do much more so among college educated workers. So next step is disability, and this is the part of the outcome that we missed for this presentation, but we will update in the final report. Thanks.
Thank you, Italo. I think we're going to go through each panelist and then we'll come to questions at the end. So Nicole, I'll turn it to you. Thanks.
Everything look okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, so thank you, everyone. This is joint work with Hilary Hoynes from UC Berkeley and Alexi Strand from the Social Security Administration. Now, legal representatives have long played an important role in the SSDI application process at the appellate level. This is common in other civil law settings where there is a judicial hearing, such as immigration court or housing courts, but really not a standard feature of the broader US social safety net. However, there is a very large payout in legal fees every year, currently about $1.2 billion, and we know very little about the value of legal representation in the SSDI context. Now, you might imagine that there really could be important gains to having representatives involved in the SSDI determination process. Now, SSDI is a complex program to apply for. Representatives might help applicants understand the rules, complete their application forms, obtain medical records. You might see them providing assistance in matching medical evidence to regulatory criteria. And in the best case, you might even see them getting cases to decisive outcomes more quickly. Currently, about half of awards in our data, at least, are made on appeal after a 2-year wait. So shorter processing times overall would, of course, reduce processing costs and workload, benefiting both SSA and applicants. But there are some concerns about aggressive marketing practices, perverse incentives possibly, and even some high-profile instances of fraud. So everyone has seen the Morgan & Morgan billboards everywhere around airports. Charles Binder was a staple of late-night television advertising for many years. And then there's, of course, the aptly named Eric Kahn here defending himself in a congressional hearing, but he was convicted of fraud. So this, this advertising, these instances of fraud and people's understanding of the incentive structure led to allegations that perhaps representatives were slowing processes down in order to earn higher fees. Now, what are the incentives? Well, representatives are paid on contingency, only if they win and only if retroactive benefits are owed. So the fee is standardized. It's 25% of back payment up to a maximum fee of $6,000. Effectively, November 30th, that will rise to $7,200. The average fee payment has been about $3,000. Back payment, what that means is that's all the payments, the benefits that are owed to a claimant from the month that the disability began, their onset date, until the time they get their decision, minus the 5-month waiting period. So, and of course, SSA deducts the fee from the claimant's back pay and pays the reps directly. That's what's known as the direct payment system. So the fee payment technically is maximized when cases move more slowly, generate more back pay, but ultimately result in a favorable decision. Of course, that's only up to a point since the fee is capped. So what we're going to do is study the impact of legal representation when representatives are engaged from the initial review stage. We're going to use new admin data. We're going to track cases through the hearing level process and their final case outcomes. And we're going to develop a new instrumental variables research design to account for the non-random assignment of representatives to cases. And that design is motivated by developments at the appellate level that we believe have altered the market structure for representation and may have increased the use of representation at the initial level. So what are these developments? Well, this figure shows from 2001 to 2019 the total amount of direct fee payments to representatives across all levels. By and large, this is largely dominated by payments for appellate cases. So what you see from 2001, total payments were about $600 million. These rose sharply, peaking in 2010 at $1.6 billion. And this coincided with the rise of a number of very large, what we call kind of supersized disability law firms. Then in 2011, fee payments began to decline, and they declined rather sharply until about 2014, where they stabilized. This decline in fee payments came on the heels of the decline in the hearing level allowance rate. Remember that representatives are paid on contingency only if they win. So when the hearing level allowance rate declined, this was a big hit to the disability law firms. And many of them had these very high throughput business models that depended on representing a lot of cases. Most famously, one of the biggest firms, Binder & Binder, filed for bankruptcy in 2014. So as all of this was playing out at the appellate level, there was an interesting doubling of representation from about 8% to about 15% between 2010 and 2014, which is the period that we're going to study here today. At the same time, there was geographic variation in the distribution of or the gains in initial representation that occurred across the country. You're seeing here two maps, one from 2010, one from 2014. The dark red areas are 3-digit zip codes where representation rates in initial claims were over 25% in these areas. And so you can see that by 2014, there were many more of these darker areas, and almost every area of the country got more initial representation, although differentially. So our research design is going to make use of these kind of more aggregate trends and how they have played out locally at the geographic level. And the hypothesis behind this is simply that the reduction in the appellate allowance rate reduced firm revenues for the big law firms. These firms turned to new revenue sources and entered the market for initial applicants. Not only the big law firms were affected, of course, but there were also many more much smaller law firms that were also affected by these changes. And so we're going to construct so-called market instruments that capture the shape of the existing market for representatives at the appellate level by area year. And essentially what the instrument does is that applicants who are living in areas with greater disability law firm presence In appellate cases, they're more likely to enlist reps for their initial filing due to local advertising or word of mouth. So if you live in an area where there has been more appellate activity, more advertising, more people using representatives for their appellate cases, people filing new initial claims will be more likely to enlist a representative. That's the instrumental variable. So we do have a paper produced on the NBER website that has a lot more information about the research design and all the validity tests. So I'll just give you a summary of the results. These are our main estimates. They are our instrumental variables estimates. And our first main finding is that initial representation leads to a 23 percentage point increase in the initial allowance rate. That's column 1 here in the table. We also find that there is a sharp, large reduction of about 45 percentage points in the appellate, probability that there is an appellate hearing, and a reduction in processing time of nearly a year. This is 316 days. So in other words, cases are more likely to be allowed initially. They don't go to hearing, to an appellate hearing quite as often, and this leads to a pretty dramatic reduction in processing time. Importantly, we find no statistically significant effect on the probability of final allowance. So it isn't as if representatives are getting cases allowed that otherwise wouldn't be allowed. It's just they're getting them allowed at the initial level instead of the final appellate level. We find this also quite intriguing 10-point increase in the probability of initial denial for insufficient evidence. And our best theory for this is that perhaps this represents representatives essentially kind of cutting their losses on cases that have either a weak evidence base or perhaps where medical records are not sufficient or can't be obtained. Now we looked at mechanisms, and the primary mechanism for the increase in the probability of initial allowance appears to be that representatives succeed in getting people who meet the listings qualified on that basis. And so of this 23.2 percentage point increase in the probability of initial allowance, 19.7, almost all of that is due to an increase in the probability of initial allowance for meeting the listings. There is a non-statistically significant increase in medical vocational allowances. So these two coefficients mechanically have to add up to the total. So you can see that 19.7 out of 23.2 means that virtually all of this effect is from cases, reps getting cases to better aligned with the regulatory criteria and qualified on that basis. Now, we also find some improvements that may represent improvements in efficiency. So claims are more likely to be electronically filed. We see a dramatic 41.6 percentage point increase in electronic filing from representatives. We also looked at processing time. Now, I told you that there is this overall reduction of nearly a year in total processing time, but there were many allegations about reps intentionally slowing cases down at the field office or at the DDS. So we wanted to look at that specifically. And that's what you're seeing here over in this right panel. We find really no evidence of case slowdowns at the field office or at the DDS. So these are positive, but not statistically significant. What we do find, however, is there is a sizable increase by 31.3 percentage points in the likelihood that a case has back pay. Now, that's not coming, however, from increases in processing times. It's coming from representatives succeeding in getting more favorable, that is, more distant onset dates for their clients. So to wrap up, we do find that representation, I'm right on schedule, improves case outcomes on the margin. We find increases in initial awards for medical listings, fewer appeals, shorter times to decision, and no effect at all on final allowances. Our estimates do imply that initial representation helps cases get to the right decision earlier. And another implication of these results is that representation in initial claims has been inefficiently low. There are large benefits for claimants, small costs for claimants, substantial cost savings for SSA, and the current contingency fee structure of for representative pay really does encourage reps to be overly selective to minimize effort, and our results do suggest that the optimal fee is quite a bit higher than the current fee for many applicants. With that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Nicole. Thank you to our entire panel. You know, this was really terrific, right? From our perspective, not only did we use important new data, did we ask important questions, methodologically advanced questions, but these are really very practical questions for us running the agency and an organization. And so I really greatly value and appreciate all of these papers. There are some questions that have come in the Q&A, and so I encourage people online to take a look at the Q&A, and you can see those that are answered, and as they are answered by our panelists, they will appear. But as people are sort of thinking and looking and working their way through that, there are a couple of others that have come in that I'll just sort of start with. Italo, I'll start with a question for you. Were there, I guess, how heterogeneous are requirements of work across different occupations as you were sort of looking at that? And, you know, we talk in summary and in aggregate, but did you find anything that would be of interest to us as we kind of dig into these questions?
So, yeah, we find a large degree of heterogeneity of occupational requirements across occupations. Is that your question? Across occupations, or yeah, there's a large degree of heterogeneity across occupations, and actually our 4 indices showed like a high degree of, a high variance, and depending on the occupation. So, but someone asked me in the chat as well, like, what can we say about like, or what we can infer from specific job requirements, right? And then, yes, we do identify that there are some particular job requirements that are more important than others in explaining these associations with the labor market outcomes. And I don't know, for example, like low postures and physical job demands. Low postures seem to be terribly important in order to explain whether people work more or less. And but in terms of the mental requirements, right? So to the mental requirements, like the ability of, whether you supervise others or you are supervised, right? It's like also very important in order to explain these associations. But others like working with public, you know, it doesn't seem to be like that so important. I don't know if that answers your question, but we do find a large degree of heterogeneity, and we do find, I think now I realize that part of the paper we're going to be analyzing these things also, some of these things also individually, right? Because if we want to talk about specific or potential policies or interventions that we can implement in order to shed light of what can be done to encourage workers to delay retirement, right? We also need to look at the specific job requirements because the elasticities of I suspect that the elasticities of how they relate to labor market outcomes might be very different across them, even within a single dimension.
Thank you very much. Nicole, I have a question for you too. Do all people benefit from representation in the same way, right? Or do impairments differ, or things that that we see in differences in the program? So you're kind of hearing a thread of interest of mine, right? The different people that we serve.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and we did look at that, and we found exceptionally large gains for people with mental health diagnoses. We find almost no benefit at all for people with back or musculoskeletal impairments. So, in fact, there is a very, very large, even larger than the average effect, increase in the initial allowance rate for people with mental health diagnoses, especially if they would qualify, under the listings, but not exclusively so. And really, there's very little gain to initial representation for people with back or musculoskeletal problems. And, it's not that representatives, do harm to them. We find really, no effect on their chances, certainly no reduction in their chances of initial allowance. But what happens is once you have initial representation, your chances of then the representative taking you on for appeal go down by quite a lot. And we think this is because simply the representative has learned quite a bit about the quality of the case, and the signal that's been extracted from SSA through the initial review process is actually a better signal because the representative has had a chance to craft the case.
Great. Thank you very much. Stephanie, a question for you. Could you walk us through eligibility for the accommodation programs in just a tick more detail?
Yeah, sure. So the first one, the employer at injury program, is the largest. It's kind of, I guess, maybe the most important to think about eligibility. So these are workers who they need to have some kind of residual impairment. So they can't go back immediately to the type of work they did before, but maybe could do something transitional. So that's one important component of eligibility. A second is that they need to be at the employer where the injury occurred. So it's kind of the same employer who has the incentive to provide those opportunities for this worker to return earlier than they would otherwise. Those workers still have to have an open workers' compensation claim while they're participating in their transitional work as well. So there is this kind of three-way connection between the worker, the employer, and then the program itself that all need to come together. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Again, I'm going to encourage people, if you asked a question, check back into the Q&A because our panel, they are working feverishly to answer your questions. We want to sort of reduce duplication between spoken and written questions. So check back for the Q&A. There are terrific questions coming in from folks in the audience as well. So I'm going to wrap us up and head us off into a break. People have been waiting patiently. Again, thank you to our panel. It was really terrific and practical and important for our program. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.